He didn't attack the killer, he walked past the judge, ignored the defense, stepped into the silence, turned his head, and stared straight into the crowd at a man declared dead 9 years ago. This wasn't justice. This was a test, and the only one who knew it was the dog. They called him Kilo in court. But before the scars, before the ash, he was Saber. He wasn't just a canine. He was the only witness left alive from a betrayal so deep, it was designed to outlive the truth itself. You might think this was just another courtroom drama, but nothing about this trial was real, except the way he remembered. What would make a trained canine break protocol, turn against his own handlers, and unlock a secret even the government tried to bury? Stay with this story. If it made you feel something, curiosity, chills, doubt, consider liking and subscribing. And let us know in the comments, what do you think he saw that day? The courtroom hummed with the low murmur of anticipation, a thick tension clinging to the air like smoke. Ceiling fans rotated lazily overhead, pushing stale air into the corners of the wood-paneled chamber. People shifted in their seats, eyes flicking toward the defense table where a man in a worn leather vest sat quietly, his face unreadable beneath mirrored sunglasses and a thin line of a beard. He was the defendant in the state's biggest narcotics case in years, Dante Red Marquez, leader of the notorious biker gang known as the Ash Vultures. At the prosecution's side, a uniformed officer gently guided a German shepherd into the courtroom. The dog moved with discipline, but its eyes sharp, amber, and alive with something primal never left the biker. His name was Kilo, a seasoned canine with a reputation for accuracy so flawless that prosecutors often said, half-jokingly, that a bark from Kilo was worth a warrant. The moment Kilo entered the room, something shifted, not in the air, in the dog. A low, almost imperceptible growl vibrated from Kilo's chest. His ears stood rigid, nose flared. Without command, Kilo lunged not in attack but in firm, focused alert. His body tensed like a coiled spring, eyes locked on Marquez's hands. The courtroom stilled. A few gasps echoed. The bailiff instinctively stepped forward, but the handler held up a hand. "Easy, let him work," the officer muttered. Kilo's attention zeroed in on one object, the defendant's gloves. Black, scuffed motorcycle gloves that clung to Marquez's hands like they'd grown there. Kilo began to bark, sharp, insistent. Not out of fear, not even aggression. This was the trained signal. The courtroom erupted into whispers. The judge banged his gavel once, twice to regain order. Marquez didn't flinch. His face remained blank, but his fingers twitched slightly against the table. Just a flicker, just enough. The judge turned toward the prosecution. "Mr. Brody, explain this." "Your Honor," Ada Brody said as he stood, buttoning his coat with calm deliberation. "This canine unit has detected an anomaly. We respectfully request the defendant remove his gloves for immediate forensic inspection." Defense counsel barked in protest, citing due process and humiliation tactics, but the judge overruled them. Two deputies approached Marquez, who shrugged and slowly peeled off his gloves. Kilo leaned in, nose twitching, tail stiff behind him like a drawn sword. The room fell back into stillness. What they didn't see, not yet, was the ripple underneath the scone. Because behind the courtroom's official camera in the police surveillance archives, a technician was reviewing prior footage for unrelated context. And there it was. 5 years ago, different case, different setting, a raging wildfire tearing through a northern pine ridge, black smoke rising like a funeral pyre into a gray sky. In the frame, Kilo, just a rookie then, barking into the smoke. Then, a flash of a biker's silhouette. Helmet, vest, and clear as a scar. The technician froze the footage, enhanced, matched the glove's frayed edge and a burn mark near the left index finger. It was the same man. The past was bleeding into the courtroom like gasoline on fire. But nobody in the room knew yet, only Kilo, who remembered the scent, who remembered the screams. The judge allowed the gloves to be bagged and sent for immediate chemical testing. The prosecutor tried to hide the shake in his voice. "We may have just uncovered a material connection between this defendant and an unsolved arson case," he said, eyes darting between the judge and the defense. "Kilo, now silent, sat beside the gloves like a guardian of buried truths. Marquez leaned back in his chair, slowly, too calm, like someone watching the first flicker of a fire he'd set long ago, now crawling back toward him. His lips twitched into the ghost of a smirk, not the smile of a man who'd been caught, no, of someone who knew the trial had only just begun. He turned toward the dog and whispered, "You remember me?" Kilo didn't bark again. He just stared, and stared, and stared. The lab report came back faster than anyone expected, delivered in a manila envelope still warm from the printer's heat, clutched in the trembling fingers of a young forensic tech who had clearly never been in a courtroom before. ADA Brody accepted it without a word, eyes flicking through the pages while the judge waited, tapping his pen rhythmically against the bench like a ticking clock. Across the room, Marquez sat motionless, elbows resting on the defense table, his eyes half-lidded as if he were on the verge of sleep, though Kilo never looked away from him, every muscle taut as a wire. "Your Honor," Brody finally said, standing again, voice lower this time, restrained but vibrating with something more prime. Murmurs bloomed across the gallery. The judge held up a hand. "Clarify." Brody nodded once. "The compound is a synthetic psychostimulant. No street name, no DEA record. It doesn't match anything currently on state or federal schedules." He paused. "But it was found once before." He didn't need to say more to shift the air. Everyone knew what that implied. A case, an unsolved one. The courtroom leaned in. "Continue," the judge said, his pen frozen mid-air. Brody swallowed. 3 years ago, in Grayson County, a woman was found dead in her apartment. No signs of forced entry. Her blood toxicology revealed an unidentified compound. The case went cold because no one could identify the drug. But he held up the report, flipping to the 3rd page. The lab ran a full compound breakdown on the residue from the gloves. "It's an exact match." A wave of disbelief swept the gallery. One juror shifted in her seat, visibly unsettled. The defense attorney, Randall Lowe, stood abruptly. "Objection. This is not admissible unless formally entered into evidence and linked to the current charges." Brody didn't even flinch. "We're submitting a motion to include it. But there's more." The lights seemed dimmer now, as though the room itself was sinking into something deeper, darker. The original victim's body, Marilyn Quinn, showed canine lacerations on her forearm, shallow punctures, initially thought to be from a stray or post-mortem scavenging. But the pattern, it matched standard canine training bites. Kilo shifted, a soft growl stirring in his chest. "And the glove?" the judge asked, voice now thin, strained. The inside lining had blood, old, dried but viable. "We've sent it for comparative DNA." Brody inhaled, voice tightening. "If it matches Marilyn Quinn, that glove wasn't just carrying residue. It carried evidence, and that glove was on Dante Marquez's hand." Lowe leaned in toward his client, whispering furiously. Marquez didn't respond. His fingers tapped slowly on the table, the rhythm strange, almost musical. Kilo took a step forward, muscles locked, tongue flicking once across his nose as tasting the tension. The judge called for a 15-minute recess, but no one moved. Not really, because in those 15 minutes, the narrative had mutated from a narcotics charge to something far more ominous. A chemical no one recognized, a dead woman tied to a previously untraceable compound, and a canine who seemed to sense not just guilt, but memory. In the hallway, Detective Mira Chen, lead on the original Quinn case, held the printed compound report in her hand like it was made of glass. "We tested this formula against over 200 known synthetics," she told Brody quietly, her voice clipped. "Nothing matched. We were convinced it was military grace or private lab work. Now it's showing up inside a biker's glove in a courtroom 3 states away." Brody asked the obvious. "You think he was there?" Chen didn't hesitate. "No doubt. If not the killer, then the delivery system. And the bite marks?" She turned slightly, glancing through the glass window at Kilo still seated beside the empty prosecution table. "That's the thing. They weren't from a random dot. They were controlled, measured, consistent with how a trained dog subdues a target without killing. Like a canine, or a retired one." She lowered her voice. "Or one that went missing." Back inside, Kilo let out a short bark. He's recognizing something. What? The judge asked, already knowing the answer would be worse than silence. Smell? The handler said simply. Something just entered this room that he smelled before. Every head turned toward the side door, where a court clerk had entered with new files. Kilo didn't bark again, but his posture spoke volumes. He was tracking, not attacking, not protecting, remembering. Beyond, though no one had touched the thermostat, Brody leaned forward over his notes, whispering as if to himself, "We're not in a trial anymore." The courtroom doors creaked open again, and the sound echoed like a warning bell across the chamber. The judge hadn't yet returned from recess, but the room buzzed with quiet tension, a kind of pre-storm electricity that settled in everyone's spine. Kilo was restless now. Not the kind of restlessness that came from distraction, but something deeper, more primal. He stood, stepped forward from his handler's side with unblinking precision, and stared at the evidence bag containing the glove. Without warning, the dog lunged, his teeth bared, his jaws clamped down on the plastic-wrapped gloves with terrifying force. There was no hesitation, no confusion, only intent. The bailiff shouted. The handler jerked back on the leash, yelling Kilo off, but Kilo didn't obey immediately. Instead, he twisted his body, biting down harder, violently tugging at the gloves as if trying to shred them open. The plastic tore with a loud crack. Everyone stood frozen, not out of fear but in confusion. Kilo had never done this. In training, in the field, in combat scenarios. Never. This was not part of his protocol, not even remotely. Ada Brody moved forward cautiously, voice low. "What the hell is he doing?" The handler answered, pale and rigid. "He's trying to destroy the gloves." That's a behavior he only exhibits when he associates an object with direct trauma. Not just danger, personal threat. Something that hurt his own, and even fewer understood what Kilo had once endured. As the handler regained control and forced Kilo into a down position, still growling, still shaking, an older man in the gallery stood. His gray flannel jacket hung loose over narrow shoulders, his cap pulled low over his face. "That dog's seen him before," he said. People turned. "Excuse me?" Ada Brody asked. The man nodded toward Marquez. "The biker. He was there the night of the blaze. The warehouse fire off Route 12 5 years ago." A beat of silence passed before the room reacted. "Who are you?" Brody asked, stepping toward him. The man straightened. "I'm Paul Kessler. I was the on-site engineer for the canine training facility that burned to the ground. That dog was the only survivor." The judge, returning just as the room erupted, pounded the gavel again, demanding order. Brody's voice cut through the chaos. "What do you mean he was the only survivor?" Kessler's eyes darkened. They were testing new tracking protocols, heat, smoke, sound-based obedience, military grade. 6 dogs, 2 handlers. The building was rigged for simulations. He paused, breath catching in his throat, as something went wrong. "We later found traces of accelerant. It wasn't an accident." The judge leaned forward, brows furrowed. "And you're telling us this now? Because I recognized the dog. His name was Saber back then. He was reassigned after the incident. I didn't know he was still active until I saw him rip that glove just now. He did the same thing to a jacket he pulled from the debris, the one covered in his partner's blood." A cold ripple passed through the room. Brody's hands were clenched now. "Are you telling us you believe this defendant Dante Marquez was at the site of that fire?" Kessler nodded grimly. The CCTV outside the facility showed a biker helmet, unidentifiable, black vest. Tall, stocky, walked with a limp on the right leg. The same limp this man had when he came into court today. Lowe stood, visibly shaking now. "This is speculation. Your Honor, we demand this line of testimony be stricken unless there's verifiable evidence." "We'll let the court decide that," the judge snapped, then turned to the handler. "Why would the dog react like that if this were the same person?" The handler exhaled slowly, choosing his words. "Canine memory works differently. If this man had any involvement in the fire that killed that dog's team, he'd remember, not in a logical way, in a visceral, reflexive one. That reaction, it's grief, anger, recognition." For a brief moment, the entire courtroom seemed suspended in one collective breath. Kilo's eyes, still locked on Marquez, burned with something beyond obedience. He wasn't just doing his job anymore. He was acting on pain. Marquez remained still, unfazed, even as every word chipped away at his defenses. "You got a lot of faith in a mutt," he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Kilo's handler to hear. But it wasn't the handler who responded. It was Kilo. A deep snarl rumbled from his chest, guttural and raw. His front paw stepped forward. Not in aggression, in assertion, as if he was saying, "You can pretend all you want. I know you." Marquez's jaw clenched, and for the first time since the trial had begun, his fingers stopped tapping. His eyes darted. Brody saw it. Everyone did. The stillness that once coated Marquez like armor had begun to crack. Across the aisle, Kilo stared, unblinking, still alert, body still charged with something ancient and unfinished. The handler kept a gentle but firm grip on the leash, but even he whispered under his breath. Then came the second envelope. Not from the forensics lab this time, but from internal affairs. The judge permitted it with raised brows and a sharp nod. And Brody stepped up to the bench, flipping it open before speaking. "Your Honor," he began. "A new development. The gloves in question." "Objection. My client never claimed ownership of the gloves. Possession alone does not imply ownership." "Then your objection is irrelevant," the judge said coldly. "Continue, Mr. Brody." Brody laid the report flat on the prosecution's desk and read aloud. "The blood found inside the gloves older than the compound residue matches the profile of a missing officer, Detective Luis Herrera. Metro Narcotics declared missing in action 5 years ago. Presumed dead. His body was never recovered." A ripple of stunned disbelief swept across the room. Kilo let out a low, warning growl, the leash tightening again. "Herrera was last seen the night of the warehouse fire," Brody continued. "He was undercover in an operation targeting illegal stimulant production. His final communication included a partial name, a nickname, Red." Brody turned. "Marquez goes by Red among his club." Lowe was red-aced now, throwing paper across the desk as he barked for a recess. The judge denied it. "We proceed." Kilo began pacing in place, ears flicking back and forth, reading every vibration in the floor. Something in the dog had shifted again, an escalation not in instinct, but memory. Brody spoke again, voice steadier than before. Detective Herrera's unit included a canine handler, Officer Tegan Shaw. He turned. Now known as Kilo. Murmurs rose from the gallery again. Paul Kessler sat silently in the back row, his gaze hard and unwavering. Detective Shaw was one of the department's best. Her canine was one of the first trained for fire scenario entry. Brody lifted a photograph, entered into evidence, a blurry freeze cam from a security cam, a figure in full fire gear, helmet, coat, oxygen tank. But something was wrong. The man held no hose, carried no equipment. "This," Brody said, "was pulled from the only surviving camera footage inside the warehouse perimeter. Thermal imaging confirms no heat source near this figure. He was not a firefighter. He was impersonating one." He turned the next page. "This man entered the K9 unit wing just moments before the explosion that collapsed the Western Hall. He looked directly at Marquez now. We believe he didn't intend to start a fire. He intended to silence that wing and the dogs inside it." Marquez finally moved. A twitch, a flex in his jaw. He didn't speak, but it was enough. Kilo growled again, louder this time, pulling slightly against. The sound echoed through the room like a curse. "Our working theory," Brody continued, "is that Mr. Marquez not only impersonated a firefighter to gain access, but that he specifically targeted that unit, seeking to eliminate the team that had closed in on his synthetic compound operation." He stepped back, gave space for silence, and then, almost in slow motion, Marquez leaned forward in his seat. "You want to know why I had the gloves?" he said, his voice gravel and venom. "Fine. I didn't pick them up on the street. I took them." The courtroom froze. Lowe spun toward him, his saying, "Don't say another word." But Marquez kept going. "The cop? Herrera. He was bleeding out in a sewer pipe 3 blocks from the blaze. Crawled there like a rat. He asked me to help. I took the gloves off him while he begged for his life. It wasn't about keeping warm. It was a reminder." "Of what?" Brody asked. Marquez's lips curled into. There was no mistaking it now. His control had snapped. He wasn't trying to play the innocent anymore. He was daring them to stop him. Brody turned slowly toward the judge. Your Honor, I motion that the court recognizes this as an implicit admission of involvement in both the death of Officer Herrera and the destruction of the K-9 unit facility. Motion noted, the judge replied, his voice suddenly dry, as though the air had turned. Kilo took one final step forward. And then something else happened. From the far end of the courtroom, a small door opened and a uniformed officer entered. He was older, face lined with grief and something else rage held in check. He carried a sealed box. Permission to speak, he asked. The judge nodded. State your name. He opened the box. Inside, a melted metal tag, a scorched collar, and a fireproof notebook, its corner charred, but a page still legible. Written in faded ink, if something happens to me, the man in the fire gear wasn't one of us. Randall Lowe stood slowly, straightening his pressed gray suit, and for the first time since the trial began, his voice cracked slightly as he addressed the court. Your Honor, he began, with the practiced confidence of a man used to shaping truth with tone, I move for an emergency psychiatric evaluation of the K-9. The judge raised his eyebrows, pen still frozen above his notes. Brody blinked twice. Excuse me, you heard me, Lowe said, turning slightly to address the gallery as if building his case for the audience more than the bench. This entire proceeding has now begun to rely on the instinctive behavior of an animal, rather than objective forensic evidence. My client is being psychologically lynched based on growls, barks, and an animal's refusal to obey protocol. It is not only unprecedented, it's irrational. The judge leaned forward. Counselor, you're suggesting the dog is hallucinating. Lowe nodded, his voice tightening. Yes, Your Honor. Dogs can suffer trauma. They can suffer from memory imprinting, false associative behavior, stress-adjured compulsions. In essence, what we are witnessing here may be a case of canine PTSD influencing courtroom procedure, and that is dangerous. The air grew thick with disbelief. Kilo sat unmoving, as if listening, his head tilted slightly, not in confusion, but in quiet judgment. Brody, lips pressed thin, stood slowly. Your Honor, with respect, this is nothing short of courtroom theater. We have physical evidence, security footage, eyewitness testimony, and a trained K-9 whose record remains unblemished. He has been vetted through over 60 successful operations, and this is the first time his handler has ever had to testify in court regarding his sanity. The judge held up a hand. Mr. Lowe, while your request is unusual, I will allow a written motion to be submitted for formal evaluation. But unless you provide clinical precedence or expert testimony, we proceed as scheduled. Lowe nodded sharply, lips twitching as if biting back something worse. Then he sat, but his eyes didn't return to Marquez, they lingered on Kilo. On Brody. Outside the courtroom, in the forensic lab across town, a technician named Avery Wynn stared at her monitor with furrowed brows. She double-checked the DNA markers, guessed the stray hair pulled from the inside of the glove had been isolated beneath the folds of synthetic fabric almost invisible, but it was human, and its mitochondrial sequence didn't match Marquez. Avery looked again at the sample ID, matched it with the court intake files, and felt a chill crawl slowly up her spine. The hair belonged to a registered DNA profile, someone already in the national database, someone whose law license was active. She printed the sheet, circled the name, and called Brody immediately. Back in court, a bailiff passed Brody a folded note. He read it silently, jaw tightening. Then he stood again. Your Honor, he said carefully, we have received updated forensic data. The glove recovered from Mr. Marquez contains not just blood from Officer Herrera, but a human hair, DNA typed. The match has been confirmed. Lowe's posture shifted in his seat. Who? The judge asked. Brody turned. The hair belongs to Mr. Randall Lowe. A bomb went off without sound. Lowe's chair screeched back as he rose, hands outstretched. That's ridiculous. Contamination. I've handled the gloves in court. Any transfer could be explained by simple contact. You never touched the inside, Brody said calmly. The hair was located deep within the lining interior stitching. Only someone who wore the gloves for an extended period could have left it there. The judge motioned for silence, but it didn't come easy. Paul Kessler stood again in the back, I remember him, he said, his voice low but cutting. He came to the site after the fire, claimed to be a legal observer for the union, said he wanted to represent any lawsuits against the fire department. But he asked too many questions about the security feeds, the dog cages, the chemical labs. Lowe's face drained of color. It's slander. Kessler didn't flinch. No, it's memory. Enough, the judge said. Mr. Lowe, I'm ordering your temporary removal from the case until we review this development. Bailiff, escort him to chambers. Lowe didn't move at first. He turned slowly to Marquez, whose eyes now gleamed not with fear but something close to contempt. You should have, and you opened your damn mouth. Lowe spat. As the bailiff approached, Lowe finally stepped away, but not before glancing one last time at Kilo. That dog, he muttered under his breath, was supposed to die in that fire. Kilo let out a low growl, no bark, just vibration, as if confirming something silently in his bones. Brody stared at the retreating lawyer, pieces clicking into place faster than he could voice them. The fire, the impersonation, the cover-up. Maybe Marquez hadn't acted alone. Maybe he was never the leader, just the hand, the fist, the teeth, the brain that had worn a suit. The removal of Randall Lowe from the courtroom left behind a silence too sharp to be mistaken for calm. It was the kind of stillness that followed the sudden collapse of a structure, air trying to fill the void left by something once solid now shattered. Marquez, now without his legal shield, leaned forward, elbows on the table, staring at the floor like a man cornered not by law but by ghosts. Brody stood unmoving, his hands resting on the evidence table, but his mind was racing. The puzzle had gained a new corner piece, the man behind the man, but it still lacked the center, the mechanism, the why. As proceedings paused for judicial review, Brody stepped into the hallway, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and urgent. You said the original K9 file was destroyed? He asked. On the other end, Captain Reyes from the K9 division exhaled audibly. Years ago. System crash, fire in the digital archive room. They said it was a surge. The drive that held Saber's record, Kilo's record, it's gone. Operational history, training data, handler reports, all of it. Brody's brow furrowed. That feels too convenient. Especially now. Reyes paused. I agree. But there's something else, not part of the digital files. We used to back up our final certifications on disk for courtroom references. 1 copy per dog, stored in analog just in case. And I found him. Brody stopped walking. Where? My desk drawer, Reyes replied, stuffed behind a stack of old invoices. I didn't even know it was there. Might have been moved during the office renovations last fall. You want? Bring it now, Brody said. Within the hour, the disk was spinning inside a forensic laptop on a side table in the DA's records room. The video was grainy, time-stamped, but unmistakably real. On screen, a younger Kilo, then Saber, stood in a concrete training bay, his ears twitching, his stance alert. A handler issued commands in short, precise phrases, guiding the dog through scent recognition drills. Brody watched, heart tightening, as the trainer produced one sealed canister after another, each labeled with a different compound or simple supply, not supportably simplified. Everything can be explained as exploratory explosives, accelerants. Saber passed them all without response until the final vial opened a sealed metal case and withdrew a tiny vial, its label coated and colorless. The moment the case cracked open, Saber's body went rigid, nose up, tail skillet. One bark, then another. He lunged at the sample, not in attack but in confirmation. He recognized this trained alert signal. Substance recognized, the trainer recorded into a mic. Code X1732, response time 2.6 seconds, repeat validation, affirmative. Brody hit pause, the same compound from the glove. Brody rewound, watching the trainer's face more closely this time. Not a department handler, private contractor. The badge on his uniform read Ravenwood Canais Systems. The logo matched a name he'd seen in passing during his early research. A defunct facility shut down after safety violations. Brody's fingers flew across his phone, digging into archived files. Ravenwood had been subcontracted by law enforcement to develop detection protocols for compounds too new or too dangerous for public registries. The only dogs who ever trained on those substances were part of a short hymn pilot program. Saber Brody printed a screenshot and brought it to the judge's chambers immediately. "Your Honor," he said, laying the image on the table, "we now have video confirmation that the canine in question was not only trained with the compound found in the glove." "You're saying this wasn't a coincidence?" "No, sir," Brody said. "This dog was designed to find exactly this. Someone erased that fact from every official system except this disc." The judge leaned back, the weight of the implication sinking in. "So, someone tried to make sure no one ever knew what this dog could smell." "Exactly," Brody said, "and that someone may have had access to both law enforcement systems and private contractor data, like a legal representative with ties to city procurement contracts." The unspoken name sat in the air between them, low. Back in the courtroom, Brody requested the video be submitted as evidence. The defense, now a court-appointed attorney unfamiliar with the case, had no objection. The footage played on screen before the jury. Every eye followed Saber's movements. Every breath seemed to hold when the dog barked, when the trainer named the compound, and when Saber's paw lifted to mark the sample as active. Kilo lay quietly beneath the table now, but his ears flicked toward the sound. Recognition pulsed in him like muscle memory. He wasn't just a dog doing his job. He was the last survivor of a system that had been built, used, and buried. A remnant of truth someone tried to burn away. As the video faded to black, the judge turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you have just seen may change how we view testimony, not only from human mouths, but from trained minds that do not lie." Brody, standing still, knew this wasn't the end. Not yet, because for all the truth revealed on tape, there was still one missing piece: the handler who oversaw that exact training. The one who whispered, "Substance recognized." And that voice, as they would soon discover, had a name. And it wasn't on any public record. The weight of the video training footage still lingered in the courtroom like the aftershock of a bomb. Silent and visible but undeniable. Jurors exchanged wide-eyed glances, unsure whether to be more disturbed by what the dog could smell or by the fact that someone had tried so hard to bury that truth. Marquez sat coiled, his previous bravado dulled into something grim and watchful, like a snake that knew its final strike had failed but still waited for one last opening. Brody, already anticipating the next ripple in the unraveling, requested that the gloves, now torn, blood-marked, and contaminated with truths no one had wanted unearthed, return to be replaced by the tech team for one final sweep. The court approved. The evidence was handed over, but no one expected what came next. 3 hours later, in the dim light of the forensic lab, a technician named Jordan Reyes carefully peeled back the inner stitching of the glove's left wrist cuff. Her tweezers met resistance. Not fabric, not blood, something else. Embedded inside a reinforced seam where no scanner had previously reached was a microchip, flat black, smaller than a fingernail. She blinked. What the hell? Carefully, she placed it into a signal reader. Nothing happened. No GPS ping, no ID code. Just a red LED pulse. Then a green one. Then static. She called Brody immediately. Back in the courtroom, the judge called for a recess to evaluate the findings. Brody arrived moments later, laptop in hand, escorted by Reyes and the lab director. "Your Honor," Brody said, "the gloves submitted into evidence contained an embedded recording device. Audio unit probably connected the laptop to the court speaker system." The courtroom fell still. Even Kilo lifted his head. The first few seconds were muffled, the sound of heavy breathing, faint leather creaking, and then the voice, a whisper barely audible. "It knows," the voice said. Then a pause, another breath. "It's already smelled it. We need to end this now." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Brody replayed the clip. The words hit harder the second time. "It's already smelled it. We need to end this now." The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Who said that?" Brody turned, his voice low. "That's what we're trying to determine." But the audio team ran a comparison through the department's voice ID system. The match came back with a 97% certainty. He took a beat. "The voice is yours, Your Honor." The room exploded. Half the gallery stood, Lowe, escorted in handcuffs for a formal statement, began to laugh. The judge opened his mouth, but no sound came. He looked to the bailiff, who took one cautious step forward. "Your Honor, don't," the judge said quietly, but the crack in his voice betrayed something deeper. Fear. Not the fear of guilt. Brody turned back to the crowd. This proves that someone, not just the accused, not just his attorney, had operational awareness inside this courtroom. A person in power, a person who knew what that dog could do, and who was prepared to act the moment it reacted. "It's a deep fake," the judge snapped louder now. "A fabricated recording. We all know what software can do these days." "Then we'll subpoena the gloves chip manufacturer," Brody replied. "He was built 6 years ago. No connectivity, no wireless manipulation. It was recording on a physical loop, meaning whoever spoke into that glove did so in real time, in person, likely within 24 hours of court." The judge rose from his chair, hand gripping the bench like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. "You're accusing a federal officer," he growled. "You're weaponizing a dog and a piece of torn leather against a sitting judge." "No," Brody said evenly. "I'm letting the evidence speak for itself." Kilo barked then. Once. Loud, sharp. The same bark he gave when confirming a positive alert. The judge's face changed. Not guilt, not yet, but recognition. Of what was coming and of what had already arrived. "Clear the room," he said quietly. But his voice held no command this time. It was the voice of a man who realized the walls weren't closing in. "You told you, this wasn't just a trial. This was a system screaming through a dog. The last voice that can't be bribed." As the room emptied, Kilo stood. His tail did not wag. His head did not tilt. But he walked toward the bench, uncommanded, and sat at its base, staring up. The judge's chambers fell into a silence more dangerous than any outburst. Everyone had left the courtroom except for Brody, 2 armed bailiffs, the court-appointed defense attorney, and of course, Kilo, who sat still as stone beneath the bench, staring upward. The judge stood frozen, one hand gripping the edge of his desk, the other clenched at his side, his breathing shallow but measured. Brody stepped forward, slowly placing a printed still from the glove's internal audio file on the judge's desk. "Your Honor, I won't assume intent, not yet, but you have a choice right now. Either explain what's happening or we let the evidence continue without you." Judge didn't answer. Instead, he glanced down at his own hands, then slowly pulled a pair of leather gloves from his coat pocket. He set them on the desk like they were nothing more than courtroom accessories, but Kilo stirred. His head turned, his ears pinned back, and then something primal took hold. In a blur of movement, Kilo lunged. Gasps rang out as the dog leapt the wood barrier in a clean arc, landing with force beside the judge's chair. Tail stiff, posture locked. The bailiff stepped forward instinctively, weapons drawn, but the handler raised his hand. "Don't shoot," he barked. "He's alerting." The judge had stepped back just in time, stumbling into his chair, eyes wide as Kilo barked once, the same bark he had given in the glove training footage. The alert bark. Brody's heart slammed against his chest as he shouted, "Get the scanner!" The forensic tech, still waiting in the hallway with the portable residue detector, rushed in, unzipping the hard case with shaking fingers. The judge didn't move, his face pale, his hands open but trembling. I wasn't," he mumbled, eyes not on the dog but on the gloves he'd just set down. The tech scanned the gloves first, moving the head of the wand over the inner lining, then across the cuffs. The device beeped a sharp electronic chime and lit up red. "Trace detected," she said. "Organic compound class 4. "Match to what?" Brody asked. The tech swallowed hard, to the blood sample from the original murder. "The Marilyn Quinn case. It's a frozen degradation pattern, means the blood was refrigerated or cryopreserved. Not recent, probably the same drop they lost in the evidence room 5 years ago." Everyone froze. "You're saying," Brody said slowly, "that the gloves the judge just removed have blood from the unsolved homicide?" The tech nodded, whispering now. "You identical protein sequencing, same decay line, same calcium loss, same iron crystallization. This is blood from the original victim." The judge collapsed into the chair like something vital had snapped inside him. "They told me it was clean," he said hoarsely. "They told me those gloves were ceremonial. from a confiscated box during trial prep. I didn't know. Where did you get them? Brody demanded. Who gave them to you? The judge didn't respond, but Kilo growled again, louder this time, low and rumbling like a storm building inside his chest. He can smell the lie, said the handler, stepping forward slowly. He knows the chain's broken, that someone close. Brody turned toward the desk, eyes scanning the judge's robe, then his briefcase. We need to scan everything he's worn in court for the past 2 weeks. Those gloves aren't just contaminated, they're part of the scene. The judge looked up, eyes bloodshot. You don't understand. It wasn't me. I never touched her, I never saw the body, but I knew something was wrong with the case. I tried to bury the inconsistencies. Brody stepped closer. You buried blood evidence to protect your position? No, the judge hissed. I buried it because if it came out, I would have had to expose the whole chain of custody. Half the evidence unit was compromised. Lowe was working with them. Marquez was the hand, but there were more. If I admitted I knew, it would have burned the entire court to the ground. So, you let an innocent man rot on the wrong charges, Brody said, and let a dog carry a weight that wasn't his. The judge looked at Kilo now, really looked, as the dog stood firm beside him, head lowered, eyes sharp, breathing steady. I didn't think you'd remember, he whispered. I didn't think they'd let you live. The handler's voice cut through the tension. He didn't just live. He carried every scent, every lie, and today he brought it back. Outside, the jury had been recalled. The court buzzed as word of the incident leaked through hushed voices and security radios. Within minutes, a secondary scan team arrived, sweeping the judge's bench, the lectern, even the law books. In one of the volumes, a hollowed-out manual on evidentiary ethics, they found a sealed vial, faded, capped, labeled X1732. Brody looked at it, eyes narrowing. This wasn't just a mishandling, this was storage, intentional, like a keepsake. Or leverage. The handler knelt beside Kilo, brushing a hand gently over the dog's back. He knew, he said, from the second we walked in. But he waited, he let us follow. That's why he didn't go for Marquez. The real trailer didn't stop at the accused. And at that moment, just before the next scan, the second technician called out, "You'll want to see this. The residue, it's also on the robe's inner lining." The courtroom had become a relic of itself. Less a place of law and order, more a stage where a darker truth pulled back its curtain. Evidence piled upon confession. Kilo's unrelenting precision had dismantled every layer of constructed narrative, and the walls that once held back secrets were now thin as paper. The forensic team's final sweep confirmed the worst. The blood on the judge's gloves matched not just the unsolved murder victim, but also matched archived DNA from a covert federal file marked Pionix burn cover-up, Shadow Protocol. Kessler, the old engineer, approached with a weathered briefcase, unlocked it with trembling hands, and pulled out a retracted field dossier stamped with a symbol no one had seen since the Cold War. A phoenix wrapped in barbed wire, one wing scorched black. They called it Unit Cerberus, Kessler said, his voice like sandpaper over stone. The black tier unit designed for infiltration, psychological disruption, and domestic surveillance. Never existed on paper after '99. Except in the dogs. Except in them. Brody took the file, flipped through faded black and white photos. That is Randall Lowe. Clean-shaven, younger. But him, he turned the next page and froze. Jesus, he whispered. That's the judge. Kessler nodded. Before the gavel, he was the gatekeeper. All of them served under Phoenix Byrne. Operated outside normal command. Answered to a man named Lennox. No last name. Intelligence says the unit fractured after a mission in Baja went wrong. Friendly fire. But it wasn't friendly. It was planned. The humans got reassigned, rebranded, rewarded. The dogs were left behind. He paused, pointing at another photo. A lean German shepherd in full harness. Bright amber eyes burning through the grainy film. That's Saber, he said. Kilo before they renamed him. He was one of 5 counter-subterfuge dogs in the final rotation. Only one who survived the Baja op. Brody stepped back, piecing it together. So you're telling me this entire courtroom was built around 3 people, Marquez, Lowe, and the judge, who all came from the same ghost unit? And that dog, Kessler added, is the last witness to what they did when no one was watching. Kilo, resting now in the corner, lifted his head slowly, eyes meeting Brody's. There was no bark, no growl, just stillness. Not fear, not confusion. Memory. Brody turned toward the jury box, which now sat empty, irrelevant. "We've been chasing a murder," he said, "but it wasn't just one victim. That warehouse fire? That wasn't random. It was a purge." The other doc on the side table, the declassified files detailed the Baja operation in grim detail, Operation Torchveil. The objective was simple: extract a rogue handler who had stolen classified neurochemical agents intended for field-enhanced interrogation. The handler was believed to be selling to foreign labs, but the mission log ended abruptly. The next entry came 2 weeks later, marked, "Field loss acknowledged, remaining assets terminated." But Saber's name was circled in red ink with one word beside it: compromised. Brody looked up. They thought he was compromised because he witnessed it, the betrayal. His own team turned on each other. "Not just that," Kessler said, pulling one final document. "The last comm log, audio only. I never submitted this. I was ordered to destroy it." He placed a small cassette player on the table, hit play. Static. Then boots crunching gravel. Then a voice: "Dog's too smart. He saw us bury her. If it remembers, we're screwed." Another voice, calm, colder, low. "Then it doesn't leave the ridge." Final click. End of tape. Brody clenched his fists. They buried one of their own. Officer Shaw, Saber's handler. He watched them do it. And now, Kessler said, he's brought it all back. Every piece, every lie. And one by one he's tearing them down. The judge, now in custody, refused to speak. Marquez sat mute. Lowe had been transferred to federal holding. But Kilo had already said enough, not in words, but in the way he moved, stopped, stared, a language beyond testimony. One the guilty could not escape. Brody turned back to Kilo, kneeling. "You weren't the evidence," he whispered. "You were the archive, the record, the one they couldn't burn." At that moment, an encrypted message arrived from the Department of Defense. Unauthorized retrieval detected from Ravenwood Facility Archive Node. An unknown user had accessed Project Cerberus master logs, and from that access point came another name. One no one had spoken in court. Not yet. The morning after the courtroom exploded with revelations, federal agents arrived with sealed orders and a different kind of authority. They didn't knock, they didn't ask, and they didn't explain. Within an hour, every piece of evidence was collected, every involved individual placed in containment, every record sealed under a new classification. Brody stood outside the courthouse, clutching the latest debrief transcript delivered to him under clearance level he hadn't even known existed until yesterday. The transcript wasn't about a trial. It wasn't even about a murder. It was about a simulation, a project, a test, Operation Delta Pulse. Its objective: determine whether a memory-trained canine from a defunct Black Ops division could autonomously identify and respond to latent threat behavior in a high-pressure civilian setting. The trial had been constructed from the inside out: staged charges, controlled defense, even the gloves. The drug, the blood, the buried tapes, it had all been seeded into the environment to provoke one reaction: whether Saber, now Kilo, could locate the true infiltrator. The hypothesis? If the dog could bypass instinct, training, and time, and still remember betrayal, then human error wouldn't be enough to keep secrets buried. Brody read the line again, unable to stop his hands from trembling. The entire trial was a controlled environment. All actors were unaware of full parameters. Inside, the courtroom had been reset. The judge's bench was empty, the lights had been dimmed, and most of the gallery was closed. But Kilo stood at the center of the floor. No leash, no command, just stillness. His eyes scanned the remaining few inside. Brody by the railing, the handler near the exit. Kessler sitting quietly with the original Cerberus file resting on his lap. But Kilo did not move. Brody whispered, "We did all this and he hasn't chosen." The handler didn't respond. He just watched. Kilo's ears flicked. His nose twitched. He turned. Slowly, one deliberate step, then another, but not toward Marquez, who sat in holding. Not toward Lowe, who was gone. Not toward He continued walking past them all and stopped. He turned his head, eyes locking upward toward the back of the courtroom. The gallery had been nearly empty, except for one man, late 50s, civilian clothes, scar above the left brow, calm posture, no movement, no expression. The man met Kilo's stare and didn't blink. Brody felt the chill before he understood why. "Who the hell is that?" he asked. The handler frowned. "No clearance on file, came in during the overflow, nobody noticed." Kessler stood up slowly, his voice dry as ash. "I know that face." Brody turned. "Who is he?" "That's Lennox," Kessler said, barely louder than a whisper. "He's declared KIA with the dogs." "He's not dead," Brody said, jaw tightening. "He's here, watching, like he never left." Kayla took another step forward. His breath slowed, his pupils narrowed, but he didn't growl, didn't bark, didn't lunge. He sat, back straight, tail resting still, and stared, as if waiting, as if acknowledging, not a threat, not anymore, just recognition. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Lennox tilted his head slightly. The scar over his eyes stretched. He smiled, or maybe challenged. Brody reached for his phone, but the signal dropped instantly. "We're jammed," he said. "We need facial confirmation, we need—" But he trailed off. Kilo had made his move, and it wasn't violent. It was definitive. Lennox stood, slowly, hands in his pockets. He walked down the aisle, past the broken chairs, past the scene of chaos and exposure. He stopped beside Kilo, lowered himself to one knee, and whispered something no one could hear. Kilo didn't flinch, didn't move. He just stared forward, locked in the moment. The dog remembered, but the question is, did he? Walked out before anyone could stop him. No one moved, not even Kilo. In the weeks that followed, reports were sealed, cases dismissed, identities erased. The press was fed a story of corruption, of breakthrough detection, of institutional reform. But Brody knew better. This wasn't about justice. It was about memory. Programmed, buried, awakened. Kilo was retired with honors. But every night as Brody drove past the canine field where Saber had once trained, he saw the dog sitting there alone, looking toward the tree line, still watching, still waiting, for the scent that would come again, for the one memory that never really died. Because some missions never end. They just wait for the next command. If this story had you holding your breath or sent a chill down your spine, consider giving it a like and subscribing for more cinematic tales just like this. What do you think Lennox whispered to Kilo before he left? Was justice truly served? Or was this just another layer of control? Drop your theories in the comments. And if you're like me, say a prayer for the ones who still carry memories they were never meant to survive.